Good morning and good afternoon and potentially good evening to everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar today. This one's entitled Remote Training Tools and Tips with Jeremy Pullen. Jeremy is the CEO of Polodis, a DevOps transformation advisory firm in Atlanta, Georgia. Most digital transformations are blind to the impact of people and organizations due to an inability to map the organization and architecture coherently. Polodis organizational architects help their clients to design cloud-friendly and compliant organizations. And Polodis, like everybody else these days, has been thrust into a entirely remote delivery at this point in time. So Jeremy's going to take us through some tips on doing your training completely remotely. So thank you, Jeremy, for joining us. And I'll hand it over to him. And thanks everybody for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Roger. That's a great intro. And everyone, thank you for giving us a few minutes today. I'm really excited to share some things we've learned over the last few months as we've transitioned to a primarily online and remote approach to training. And so everything that we're covering today has been from experience. It's been from learning what works and what doesn't. And so I hope you learned something from this, and don't just learn it, try it out, because it really is fun to do remote training. It's not something I anticipated being fun, but it actually really is. So let's get started. Okay, so tip number one, it's really boring, but use the first hour of content that you deliver to learn your online tools and for your audience to learn your online tools. So before you get started, before you offer a class, figure out what features you want to use and do some dry runs, and start with some simple activities with the class itself. Go through each of those features in the first hour and just do a complete shakeout of those features. You know, how does voting work? How does screen sharing work? And as you do that, go ahead and introduce valuable content. Don't try to separate out the content from the learning of the tools. Do it together. You end up covering some valuable information, but the goal is not the information. The goal is learning how to use the tools. So stop, ask people questions, figure out what's going on, and get ready for some folks to have a slow network connection, or to not really think ahead and they've dialed into a class using their cell phone and they need to go relocate and find a place that they can actually pay attention. So don't rush. Slow is fast in this particular concern. And then take some time afterwards, give folks a break after the first hour and let folks who are having issues stay on and work through those issues with them. That's tip number one. That really makes a huge difference in speeding up the rest of the class because now everyone's on the same page. Okay. In one of my particular tools that I use is as a trainer, I like having multiple screens. That allows me to have many of the content I'm presenting on one screen, while I can have all of the participants' video on the other screen, so I'm not having to switch back and forth. So as a trainer, that's particularly useful for me. So tip number two, group size rules that you're used to using in a physical setting don't work the same way online. It used to be you'd have a lot of people trying to crowd around a flip chart. Well, you don't have that issue anymore. You can get 20 people around a virtual whiteboard without an issue. So the rules that you are used to using don't really apply now. One particularly useful tip that I've used in this particular setting is using group chat. So you can have one person talking about what they just put on the whiteboard, And you can have 20 or 30 other people using group chat to have a conversation that is multi-threaded and everybody is seeing what's going on and they can still pay attention to the primary discussion. So that really scales in a way that's very different than when you're physically in the same room with people. So try it out, it's really useful. Okay, so let's take a shot at that ourselves. So here's a flip chart, and I'd love to know what your goals are for this particular webinar. And so here's a QR code, and feel free to throw some Post-it notes up, take your phone out, and scan the QR code, and that will enable quick share, or use the quick share that's enabled. And if you have anything particular you'd like to learn, I'd love to hear it. So let's pause. Make it engaging. Great. Anyone else? Okay. So there we go. Hearing everyone's opinions, having fun. All right. So I'm going to keep going, but that's one way of using QuickShare to do this, and we can do it with a lot of people. And the facilitator can either read it out and let the conversation keep going on chat. All right, so let's keep going on to tip number 3. So I don't know if other people have used the term, but I'm going to call it digital whiplash. When you switch back and forth between too many tools, it creates this disconcerting experience for class attendees. So you really want to pick one primary online medium and try not to switch too much. So for instance, if you're using a digital whiteboard and you're using conferencing technology like GoToMeeting and Zoom, or you have other tools, having your attendees switch between a browser and a Zoom window and something else ends up causing a lot of task switching tasks for them. So that whiplash effect is really uncomfortable for them. And so instead, don't even use Zoom screen sharing. Just use that for conferencing and maybe breakout rooms, but use your virtual whiteboard for sharing slides. And the follow me feature in Span is particularly useful for this. And so everyone logs into Span, they follow the presenter, and you're never trying to use screen sharing most of the time, except for some rare circumstances. So here's an example of that. Here's one of our particular decks that we use with our classes. And so we can present directly in the whiteboard instead of having to switch between different mediums. So I'm just going to click through a couple of slides and let's keep going. So that's one example of how we can have one medium that is the container for everything else. And a digital whiteboarding solution is a great way to do that. So that's tip number 3. So tip 4, you really want to create dedicated spaces for people to have team breakouts. You may be familiar with training from the back of the room, and there are different exercises with how to have maybe different corners of the room with different whiteboards, and you'll go do one exercise and then rotate and then rotate, and you have 30 minutes, 10 minutes per whiteboard. Don't do that online. You don't need to serialize those discussions. Instead, create a separate breakout space and just make a copy. And everybody can work in their own workspace. And that speeds things up. And then you can bring folks back together and look at each group's individual workspace. So here I've got an example where each group has a workspace 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that can support 5 groups. They're all copies of a template. And now everybody is working off the same thing, but they're not having to wait for everyone else. So let's keep going, and we're going to dive into that a little bit more. So tip number 5 is to create interactive games within your online environment. Don't try to simulate a physical space. Be creative with it. And now we're going to actually go do that. So I've created a blue room, and you can color code them. That's one way to make it easy to navigate. So let's go to our group 1 blue workspace. And now we have a few games. And one of the things we do is Kanban training. And so here's some examples. This isn't the full workspace, but it's a few things selected from it. So we might play a game. Let's practice number 1 that we covered before. Okay, visualize. We want to visualize our work. And then we can use the cards to essentially play a game like this. We can also cover things like what are the myths and facts of Kanban. I'm not going to go through all of them, obviously, but up to people can work on one Kanban board. That's a myth. That's not a particular limitation of Kanban. So that's another way of doing the same kind of game. All right, here's another thing we can do. And what I've done is I took some quotes from famous people and I put them in a Word document, exported to PDF. And now what we can do is go in and we can annotate this particular document that's been imported. So let's do a matching exercise. I'm going to pick a color, and all right, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. Who do we think that is? And in that case, that's Nelson Mandela. Or I'm going to pick a larger marker here. Okay, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. I believe that's John Lennon. And so that's an example of taking a PDF and marking it up. The beautiful thing about doing this is then it's still there. And then we can compare it to the actual answers on the second page. And so that's a really useful way for folks to do a training from the back of the room, interactive approach online. And they can do that during a breakout session. Okay, so those are a few tips on how to create games online. There are plenty of other ways that you can do it, I'm sure. And so don't limit your creativity. Try some stuff out and see what works. Okay, so tip number 6. This is one of my favorites. Do micro-training. Break up whatever training you're doing into 1.5 to 2 hour blocks. Spread it over multiple days, and then just allocate that time every day until you're done. It is so effective. We've been doing this recently, and it has a few big advantages. Number 1, you don't get the mental overload of being on a Zoom call or another conferencing call for half a day or a whole day. Second, you don't have to take breaks. You just go, you do it, and then the break time is on your participants' schedule, not on yours. Another advantage is that if people have issues, like in point 1, they have issues with their tools, it allows them to go offline, figure out their issue, and then come back. And the worst case is they may have missed an hour and a half or 2 hours. So the technical issues end up being a lot easier to work through when you have breaks to identify the root cause and go fix them, and you can go help your attendees. So I'd love for you to experience this yourself, and we're going to send you an email for a free micro training on leadership, where this is something that you don't just have to hear me talk about it, you can actually experience it. So look for that email in the next few days, and I'd love to let you experience that for free with us. Okay. I have a lot of other friends who've been doing the same thing, by the way, and so that's been validated with a number of trainers, not just with Polodis, but corporate trainers at a number of companies that I have contact with. Okay, so let's go to tip 7, connect with people and have fun. We have a tendency with webinars and with other online interactions to assume that it's not an opportunity to connect personally. That's something that you should really rethink if that's one of your assumptions. Take time to allocate social interaction into these classes. When you have a breakout room, don't set it for 5 minutes. Set it for 15 minutes. Set it for 20 minutes, but only have 10 or 15 minutes of content. That allows people, after they've done an activity, to talk, to chat. Give everybody a single Slack community that they can join in and have a conversation. And so I'm leading by example here. Here is a global Agile community called Agile Octane. And I've created a remote training channel, and I'd love for you to join and say hi and share some of your ideas with each other rather than just listening to me. So please log in and say hi, enter the link and join the remote training channel, and I'd love to keep the conversation going. So here's a quick summary. Use the first hour of content to help people learn the tools. That's really important because everybody learns the tools at a different speed, and you want everybody on the same page. Second, the rules that you have used in the past for group sizes don't work the same, so experiment and learn what your group size limitations are, and assume that a bigger group will probably work better than it did physically. So next, prevent digital whiplash by staying in a single online medium as much as possible. A product like Span is a great choice for this, but there are plenty of other choices as well. Tip 4, create dedicated spaces for teams. So don't try to have teams working in one space. When they break out, give them a separate workspace for them to go do things. And then tip 5, create games in those workspaces that they can do together to have fun. And don't limit your creativity there. Tip 6, my favorite, do micro-training. It's a really effective way to do training. And it also increases the experience, improves the experience, increases the stickiness of the content. And then finally, connect. Use this as a way to still connect relationally with people and have a good time doing it. So let's try quick share out again. And here's the code. I'm going to enable quick share for this. Okay, so I'd love to know what some of your questions might be. So let's pause now and do a quick Q&A.
I'll just offer as well. Sorry, Jeremy, there were a couple of people who said they were having trouble with the QR code. If you want to ask questions in the question tab of GoToWebinar, we can grab them from there as well.
And here's the QR code again, and I can copy that. And I'll delete the old one and paste the new one. Okay. All right, there we go. So there's the updated QR code. Perfect. So what questions do you guys have? Okay, so first question, how long do you find it takes people to learn SPAN if they never used it before? At the beginning on tip number 1, I said about an hour. That included SPAN, Zoom, and including some pretty special, specific features of both tools. So about an hour, but part of that was covering content and using that time to bring folks up to speed on tools. So about an hour is the time I've found effective for a combination of tools, including SPAN. Okay, let's see. How do you read people when remote? That's where the dual video is really important. And being able to look at who's even sharing their video, who isn't. If they're not comfortable sharing it, that may indicate something. Using voting tools is really useful. And using something like this, where folks are giving input, really gets them out of their comfort zone in a way that is non-threatening for them. So it can be a little bit harder, but I take that back. In many ways, it's about the same as in when doing physical training. You can actually see everyone's faces easier because everybody's on one big gallery view most of the time. Okay, what do you do if people aren't engaging online? And it's really about helping them, number 1, become comfortable with the tools. Number 2, view it as a personal experience, even though it's a different medium. So doing some breakout sessions, introducing each other, doing a whiteboarding session just like this. Ask them, like I did at the beginning of this webinar, ask them, what would you like to get out of this? And have them put the Post-it notes up there. And I'm sure there are lots of other ideas as well. I like doing icebreakers personally. That's one of my things. What are the top 3 features used in SPAN that support the best engagement? So 3 things. Number 1, follow me is one of my favorite features. Second is embedding your presentations directly in the canvas. And then I'd say the third thing is probably I'm going to have to debate on this. Don't hold me to this, but I really like using the new connectors. Okay, all right, this one we've got. Okay, next one. How do you manage training across time zones? And that's one advantage of the micro-training approach, is you can target the times specifically to different time zones. And so an early morning time slot works really well to cover a lot of time zones because you can hit Asia, you can hit Europe, and you can hit a large part of the US with something early in the morning. So that's one thing that I really like. Then you can also set up a separate micro-training for other time zones. So you do a combination, but I really like that 2-hour time block early in the morning. Okay, next one. What's the maximum number? I'm going out of order here. Let me pick from the other ones. I want to talk to people at the same time as you SPAN. Will working Zoom and SPAN together work? Absolutely. That's what I do all the time, is I use Zoom or another conferencing tool. I use SPAN as the primary way of sharing, but then I use Zoom for the audio and video. Okay, how do you encourage people to engage with the games and activities proposed? So that's where having folks in a breakout is important. And go ahead and elect somebody to be the one who gets things started when you do a breakout group. You don't have to do that. I have found that it helps a little bit. Okay, this one I will get to in a second. What if people don't want to show their faces? I do have sometimes where that happens, and I respect that. You know, sometimes folks don't want to show their faces, and then we just let them do as they feel comfortable. Do we prefer that they show their face? Yeah, because it's more personable. But again, this is for them to have a good experience. So, do you invite people in modes other than edit? If so, how do you choose? Sometimes, but for training, I like edit mode because it increases the interactivity. So for a webinar, maybe not, but for a training class, I almost always do edit. So here's the key on that one. Make a copy of your workspace, create a master workspace for a class, and then make a copy of that, invite people to the copy. Don't invite them to your master workspace. That way you don't worry too much about it getting messed up. And one feature of span is the undo feature. So just Control Z, do undo. If somebody messes something up, that works great. Okay, have you evaluated other tools, and why is this one better? I've evaluated a lot of tools. There are a lot of advantages, but one particular one about this tool, Follow Me, is fantastic. And another thing is I actually like the limit of the height to the linear left to right or right to left as you see fit workflow within this particular product. Rather than having a big open canvas, I like it being limited in height. It gives a much cleaner navigation and helps folks know where they are in the class. Okay, trying to go in order here. Is it important for your participants to have video on? I'd put that with this people showing their faces. It is important to me and other participants, but we don't ever want to make anyone uncomfortable. And people have bandwidth issues sometimes. So if there's a bandwidth issue, that might be a reason not to turn it on as well. Okay, how to get people back from breakouts into their main group? Well, it depends on what product you're using. If you're using a product like Zoom, you can force them to come out. If you don't, then there's some other products where they control coming back, and it's just like a physical class. You might have to hop into that room, let them know, hey guys, it's time to come back, and then it's really going to be up to them. I like having a helper, so it may not be a full trainer, but it may be someone who can help with logistical issues. So it's usually me plus another person, and the other person is providing logistical support, and they can also go between breakout groups and let them know it's time to come back, even as you've gotten started. Okay, what's the recommended max number of users for a brainstorming session using Span? Roger may be a better answer for that, but I haven't found any limits yet that were particularly practical. So I find that some people have been trying to do really big classes like 50, 60 people. I'm not a fan of that in general. And so I tend to focus on doing classes of 20 to 30 at the most. And I haven't hit any limits with that. Okay. And that's not related to Span, that's related to other folks. Roger, do you want to comment on that particular card?
Yeah, so I was going to say I'm not surprised by your answer, because that limitation is, or that recommendation of 2030 is sort of based on style of delivery. The biggest session I participated in was 450, but that was a one-way. Like to be able to take input from hundreds of people and in real time disseminate it and discuss it is not possible, just sheer numbers. But I have had hundreds of people. It's more of a direct polling at that point. You present information and then poll the group for collective feedback. So then, I'd share the answer Jeremy had. The limit becomes the dynamic of how you want to interact with people, and the tool will support.
Great, we had very similar experiences then. Okay, quick question. What is span? I can't find it online. I believe, Roger, it's span.nareva.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you can find all the information on at just nureva.com. So Span is our Span workspace software as a service.
Cool. All right, would it be possible to optionally make a note sent by QuickShare, not anonymous? So that's a feature request for you, Roger. Do you want to speak to that?
Sorry, what was the?
It's this card. Would it be possible to optionally make a note sent by QuickShare, not anonymous? So be able to have a name
Right.
associated.
Yes, then. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way that QuickShare was made anonymous intentionally, so people value that anonymity to get sort of pure, true opinions. The way that I've seen a lot of people work around that is with a simple sort of organizational decision or a legend. So if you have a small enough group of people, you could do it by color. With a larger group, you could just add initials or numbers is what I've seen people do. So, Jeremy could create a legend at the side that says, Jeremy's number 1, I'm number 2, Trisha's number 3, and we could do things like that. So, yeah, sent from JK, yeah. So initials work, numbering works. So, but we don't have a non-anonymous quick share at this time.
Cool. Will the session recording be shared? Yes, I believe the answer for that's yes, and that will be sent out by email afterwards. Next question, how to encourage people to give feedback and interact with their teams. And this is something, number one, that takes a little practice, but stop and ask a question, be really clear about how people interact. So for instance, say, go ahead and put your comments in the chat window, and then say, does anyone need help finding the chat window? All right, I see a chat from a few of you. Does anyone else need help getting chat working? So you've got to really coax people along, because there are two parts to this. One is learning to use the tools, and two is learning that this is a human interaction. It's not a one-way, presentation. And so really encouraging the use of the tools for that interaction is key, and making it comfortable for people. So don't do it in a way where it's blaming anyone if they don't put a chat in. It's, hey guys, I'd really like to use this class to be interactive, to learn more together. And so what if we use chat to do that? That's a much different approach than saying, I don't see you in chat, better put that chat in so we can interact. That undermines the intention of doing interactive class. So be inviting and help folks learn the tools. Okay, last question so far. Let's see. If I have both videos and Span open, the post-its are too small to read, and it's hard to integrate. And that's one big advantage of the dual monitor setup that I showed you. If you're a trainer, you want to be able to see everyone's video, and you want to be able to see what you're sharing. And so, yes, and you can expand and make post-its big or small, but go do a dual monitor setup if you're doing a lot of training. It's really, really worth the investment. Next comment. So is Slack for offline engagement? And that's really your choice. You can use it for live engagement as a replacement for another chat solution, and it gives you the offline engagement as well. So it gives you both. So I'm a big fan of using Slack or Teams or other products for that offline and potentially online based on how things are going. My one caution there would be for live, you don't want to create too much whiplash. So I found having one thing for sharing screens, like Span, is better than using Zoom. But maybe Zoom's chat feature is the best thing to use, so you're not switching between too many tools at once. So that would be my main caution. Roger, how are we on time?
We are at 10:36, and I think we had this scheduled to 10:30, but you know, a few people have dropped off. So yeah, I think we've sort of slowed down on questions. There's one comment, which is great. I guess it's a question too that I asked you, so I'll let you answer that, and then maybe we'll sign off.
Hey, thank you so much. And the answer is my mother-in-law is an interior decorator, and she helped me decorate my office, and it's a big wall screen. It's the screen that you would typically have freestanding, and we turned it into a wall decoration. So thank you.
And I think that brings us to time. So thank you again, Jeremy, for joining us. I actually really enjoyed this one because I too am doing everything remote, and any tips, there's a few things here that are new things for me to think about. So I'm sure everybody learned a thing or two. Again, appreciate it. We'll share the video on our website and links by email. And yeah, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Jeremy, for doing this for us.
Thanks so much, and everyone, please connect to me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'd love to talk to you and keep this conversation going.